Life of Tiberius Gracchus by Plutarch. Tiberius Gracchus lived from 163 to 133 BCE, before the Common Era, or BC, before Christ. Chapter 1. Now that I have fulfilled the first part of my task in relating the story of the lives of the Spartan kings, Agis and Cleomenes, it remains to consider an equally tragic history, the fate of the Roman pair, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, which I have chosen as a parallel. They were the sons of Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, a man who, although he had held the office of censor, served twice as consul and celebrated 2 triumphs, was even more renowned for his personal character than for his achievements. It was for this reason that, after the death of Scipio Africanus, the conqueror of Hannibal, even though Tiberius had not been a friend of his, and had in fact opposed him in politics, he was nevertheless considered worthy to marry Scipio's daughter Cornelia. There is a story that Tiberius once caught a pair of snakes on his bed, and that the augurs, after giving thought to this prodigy, told him that he must neither kill both reptiles nor let both go. Their interpretation was that he must deal with each separately, and that if he killed the male serpent, this would bring about his own death, if the female, Cornelia's. Gracchus loved his wife, and considered that as he was far advanced in years, while his wife was still young, it was better that he should die, and so he killed the male snake. He let the female escape, and he died soon afterwards, leaving Cornelia with 12 children by him. Cornelia took charge both of the children and of her husband's property, and proved herself a woman of such discretion and noble ideals, and so devoted a mother, that Tiberius was considered to have made no unreasonable choice in electing to die in place of such a wife. For when Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, asked for her hand in marriage, and invited her to share his crown, she refused, and remained a widow. While she was still a widow, she lost all her children but 3, a daughter who married Scipio Africanus the younger, and 2 sons, Tiberius, the subject of this story, and Gaius. These boys Cornelia brought up with such care and such ambitious hopes that, although by common consent no Romans have ever been more naturally gifted, they were considered to owe their virtues even more to their education than to their heredity. Chapter 2. We notice that the figures of Castor and Pollux, as they are represented in sculpture and painting, show certain differences in their physique, as between the boxer and the runner. In the same way, with these 2 young Romans, in spite of their strong resemblance to one another in courage and self-discipline, as well as in generosity, eloquence, and idealism, there are also developed some strong contrasts, which manifested themselves both in their actions and in their political careers. And it will not be out of place for me to set forth these differences before going further. First of all, Tiberius was gentle and composed, alike in his cast of features, expression, and demeanor, whereas Gaius was highly strung and impassioned. Thus, when they addressed the people, Tiberius always spoke in a decorous tone, and remained standing in the same position, whereas Gaius was the first Roman to stride up and down the rostra, and wrench his toga off his shoulder, in the same way that Cleon the Athenian is said to have been the first of the demagogues to tear open his cloak and slap his thigh. Gaius's oratory tended to electrify his audience, and was impassioned to the point of exaggeration, whereas Tiberius was more conciliatory, and appealed to men's sense of pity. Tiberius's style was pure, and his language chosen with extreme care, whereas Gaius's was plausible and exuberant. In the same way, as regards their table and mode of life, Gaius, although austere if judged by the standards of his contemporaries, was yet somewhat ostentatious, and addicted to new fashions by comparison with his brother. We have some evidence for this in the accusation brought against him by Drusus of buying silver dolphins at the price of 1,250 drachmas a pound. The same differences which appeared in their styles of speaking were also reflected in their characters. Tiberius was mild and reasonable, while his brother was harsh and impulsive, and often, against his better judgment, allowed himself to be so far carried away by anger while he was speaking that his voice would rise to a high pitch and he would lapse into abuse and lose the thread of his argument. To guard against such digressions, he employed a well-educated slave named Licinius, or Licinius, who stood behind him with an instrument which was intended to correct the tones of his voice and give them the proper pitch. Whenever he noticed that Gaius's voice was becoming harsh or broken with passion, he would sound a soft note, and as soon as Gaius heard this, he would immediately moderate his anger, tone down his voice, and show that his emotions were under control. Chapter 3. These were the differences between the two brothers, but in respect of bravery in the face of the enemy, justice in their dealings with the subjects of people, scrupulous attention to their public duties, and restraint in the pleasures that they allowed themselves, both were exactly alike. Tiberius, however, was 9 years older than his brother, which meant that their political careers were separated by an interval, and it was this factor rather than any other which turned out to be the fatal weakness in their undertakings. They did not rise to political prominence at the same time, with the result that their powers were exerted separately, whereas if they only had been combined, the effect, would have been irresistible. I must therefore describe their careers individually, and I shall deal with the elder brother first. Chapter 4. By the time that Tiberius arrived at manhood, he had already earned such a reputation that he was considered worthy to be elected to a priesthood in the college of augurs. But he owed this distinction to his personal merits rather than by his noble birth. This was proved by the action of Appius Claudius, a man who had held the offices of censor and consul, who by reason of his rank had been raised to the position of leader of the Senate, and who, for the loftiness of his spirit, surpassed all the Romans of his time. When the augurs held a banquet on the occasion of the young man's election to office, Appius greeted Tiberius warmly, expressed his regard for him, and went on to offer him his daughter's hand in marriage. Tiberius gladly accepted, and the betrothal was agreed at once. Later, when Appius returned home, he called out excitedly to his wife from the doorway where he was standing, "Antistia, I have betrothed our Claudia." His wife answered in surprise, "Why so suddenly? Why are you in such a hurry, unless you have found Tiberius Gracchus for a husband?" I know that some writers relate this story of Tiberius's father and Scipio Africanus, but most of them follow the version which I have given, and Polybius mentions that after Scipio Africanus's death, Cornelia's relatives chose Tiberius in preference to any other husband and gave her to him in marriage, which indicates that her father had left her unaffianced and unbetrothed. Soon afterwards, the young Tiberius served for a period in Africa, under Scipio Africanus the Younger, who had married his sister. There, according to Roman custom, he shared a tent with his commander, and it was not long before he learned to appreciate Scipio's character. The older man was a model of the soldierly virtues, and provided a constant example to imitate and rival these qualities in action. Tiberius soon came to surpass all the young Romans of his age in discipline and courage. Indeed, he was the first to scale the enemy's wall, according to Fannius, who writes that he himself climbed up with Tiberius and shared in the exploit. Tiberius won the affections of many of his comrades while he was with the army, and was greatly missed when he returned to Italy.